Hello, and welcome to another MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar. I'm your host, the co-founder and chief product officer for MarketMuse, Jeff Coyle. Today's discussion is entitled Keys to a Winning Content Strategy for Healthcare Companies. And it's going to be a discussion focused on content quality, production value, how to build and maintain trust with content marketing. We're also going to talk about crisis communications, like we're facing today, how to maintain trust during challenging times, and how to continue to publish with empathy. Before I go into our special guest today, I've got a few housekeeping notes. Ask us questions in the GoToMeeting. It's usually on the right side of your screen. And we'll either get to them in line if they're directly relevant to our discussion, answer them at the end. If we don't get to any at the end, we'll shoot you them personally via an email thread. The recording and notes are available right after the webinar and will be sent via email. So please look for those. You'll probably get them sent to you yesterday. Probably get them sent to you tomorrow or the day after. And while you're at it, go download some of the awesome recordings we have from, last time. Our last event was with technical SEO superstar, Hamlet Batista, sales enablement leaders like Pam Didner, SEO superstars, Andy Crestodina, or all around brilliant folks, which you should listen to anything they say or do, like Kevin Indig. If you download multiple of those this week, shoot me a note, tell me which ones you looked at, and I'll set up a personal discussion from a content strategy review with one of either myself or one of our content advisory team leads. And now I'll introduce today's special guest. He is the CEO of a really elite content strategy and marketing firm. They produce amazing content. If you've seen me tweet about them, about RightSource, it is just good stuff consistently. He laughs, he'll blush as I say it, but it's consistent, amazing content. He's the perfect person to be speaking about healthcare content. Mike Sweeney.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. What a crazy yet appropriate, hopefully, time to talk about content in healthcare.
Absolutely.
With what's going on.
Yeah, and perfect. And I think that's one thing we want to talk about. We're going to be talking about everything across the board. Pre-decision, unbranded, branded, adherence, crisis, everything under the sun. Before we do that, tell us a little bit more about RightSource Marketing, your background, and any highlights, or who do you typically work for, if it's just healthcare or otherwise?
Sure. So we're a content marketing firm that is specifically focused on maximizing our clients' content marketing investments. And what do I mean by that? At this point, any sophisticated operation is doing content marketing, but a lot of them are on a hamster wheel in terms of content creation, and they're focused on create, whether it's the CEO dictating that or someone else. And what we found is that means they're not squeezing the most out of the content they're creating. They're so focused on creation. And so what we focus on doing is looking at what they're already doing and then what they can do and actually maximizing that investment. We do it primarily for healthcare companies in various segments of healthcare, as well as B2B technology companies.
Right. This is really aligned. It's a big focus area for us as well. That's why we started working together, and we've done things in the past. But I did want to comment that we very rarely see agencies that consistently do extraordinarily high quality content that also understand repurposing. And the value of repurposing and the value of content efficiency. And that content efficiency really focusing on how much do I publish, how often do I publish content that is successful. And that is really important, from a quality perspective, as well as now with a huge focus on writing content that appeals to the right stages of the buy cycle and to the right user intent. How does RightSource think about content quality? And what are the types of things you're thinking about when you're evaluating historical success?
Yeah, so actually a good friend of both of ours, a guy named Mike Benedict, he's the one that gave me this. He said, remember, we're creating content for two things or beings, humans and machines / search engines.
Right.
And if you think about the commonality between both, what do both value the most? Quality, increasingly high quality, and this is reflected in what you're showing on the slides in terms of how Google values it. But that is the one thing you can say about if you're trying to outguess or guess what Google's going to do next. they will always continue to value different forms of quality. And what we know about human psychology is the same thing. Consumers are just becoming more and more discerning. So quality is the thread through both of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, when you look at something where you're their end state being delivering the ideal solution today, but the ideal solution at this moment, how are you appealing to all of those stages of the buy cycle? How are you appealing to answering as many questions as you can, leaving somebody with a great experience so that they feel good about having searched for this and getting to the page that they're reading?
Yeah.
How has that changed for you over the years? I mean, you've been doing this a long time. As of I can talk for hours about how this has changed over time, but how has this changed specifically for you and the services that you deliver? And I ask that from the lens of, you've been doing this for a long time. I always laugh and say that, I was leading the charge on quality way before Panda, right? How do you, and I know you feel the same way. How has it changed for you? Has it made it easier? Has it made it, that much harder because more people are thinking critically about quality?
Well, I would say initially it was very easy because back in 2010 era, very few people were focused on this, and it was enough to just create basic content, whether you're a healthcare organization or otherwise. That was enough. It was enough not only for the humans, but it was enough for Google as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously become harder, and you have to pay far more attention to the types of content you create and user intent and things like that. Again, both for the more discerning consumer and for what Google is looking at. And if you take that a step further in healthcare with YMYL and EAT, which are search quality evaluation guidelines, which you understand far more than I do, it's high stakes content in healthcare, right? Because your money or your life. If you give the wrong health advice, things happen to people. So it's become harder to break through the clutter for people. But again, that's why we're all focused on producing the highest quality possible.
Yeah, and how do you coach? And we were talking about that. You talked about expertise, authority, and trust. Your money or your life, which can be health. It can also be, legal advice, advice about your money, as it obviously states. And that the lines blur on what will dictate, an industry that requires extremely high level. How do you, for in general, how do you guide your clients to make decisions about what to publish, how to be inspired? All right, what is your kind of mantra there?
Yeah.
You had said you run into the door and often the CEO dictated what they need to write, and then I like to call those marketing teams order taking marketing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ticket. Somebody said write this piece. They write that piece. They deliver it. That's their editorial calendar. How do you get someone out of that cycle, that burdensome cycle?
Oh gosh, well, I don't know if I can speak to how you necessarily convince the CEO always, because as you know, difficult characters, including myself. But in general, I would say there's a few things. One, we like to remind people, and it seems simple, the content needs to focus on the audience, not you, not self-serving, not features. The focus on what the audience and teaching them something, right? Actually inform them about something. So whenever we kind of go off the rails with clients, we remind them, is this actually about your audience, or is this a self-serving piece of content? The second thing, it's why we pay a lot of attention to strategy and planning, and really comprehensive strategy and planning, because one of the things we do in that process is we create themes which serve as guardrails, right? Because as you guys know, anyone listening, you're going to get all kinds of content requests. We should write about this. We should create that. Once you create those guardrails and agree, these are the themes we're going to focus on, if someone brings something in that doesn't fit in one of those, it's at least a little bit easier to say, guys, this just doesn't fit in the plan we had. The last thing I'll say, the third type is opportunistic content, kind of like what we're dealing with right now with the coronavirus. Obviously, you have to leave room for current events and things like that to happen, so you can't be so rigid that you can't accommodate that.
No, I think it's very wise a way of thinking about it. It's actually similar to a conversation that we had, that everyone else that's listening to this webinar it wasn't privy to. So I'll explain basically what I was saying. Was, you might have that editorial calendar that's already built. Make sure that you're putting your best foot forward for everything that you publish. Maybe you have some topics that you want to own, you want to cover, you have some gaps. Well, put those together and make sure that's documented so people know what the span of what you're looking to build. You may also, like you have said, temporal things, things that just come up, and for one reason or another, maybe it's low-hanging fruit, maybe it's something that, like you said, it's more newsworthy. I think that's a great strategy for anyone thinking about, maybe you don't have a documented content strategy. Those are the 3 lines you want. You want the ability to publish something you see that's opportunistic, the ability to publish to take care of large business goals, like we want to own this topic, we want to outperform this particular competitor, and then you have your editorial content, editorial content strategy. You have your editorial calendar, which is going after your larger brand vision. I think that 1, 2, 3 sequence works for the gross majority of firms. It leads to a question though, for healthcare marketers, what is special about them from the standpoint of building that content strategy, given all the regulations, given the unbranded, the branded, all those types of things? What do you see that's most important for them to consider when they're building those strategies?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, healthcare marketers have it a little bit more difficult than, let's say, a technology marketer, okay? Because while there's mistrust in every industry, it's more rampant in the medical profession. I think about, my family was largely in the medical profession when my dad practiced medicine and my grandfather back in the 60s and 70s. There was something like a 75% trust factor in your medical leaders. Now that's dropped to about a third. And so healthcare marketers already start rules and regulations, and then they start from this spot of, wow, people don't necessarily trust us from the get-go. So I'd say that's what's dramatically different in healthcare, the rules and regulations, and the trust factor that has to be overcome consistently, not just one time.
Then I just got a question in the chat, which we'll get to at the end, but it covers, how do you establish trust? What are some of the tips you have that establish trust? Let's cover that towards the end of the discussion, because I think that we probably have a laundry list of ways to focus trust and ways to establish. But like you said, how do you support the teams, like showing who the people are in a particular space when you get started? Who's got great content? Who's got stuff that is a little bit less trustworthy that we can put ourselves ahead of? Is that kind of part of your process, or is it completely kind of inside? Do you look at competitors as well as inside the box at the companies you're working with?
We do look at competitors, however, and I imagine we're all the same here. I always caution against that, because that doesn't mean the competition is doing things right. Like, we look at competition maybe to, borrow some things and try to identify who might be kind of addressing a topic or theme in a way that we want to do it. That's one of the reasons why we also evaluate what we call an aspirational peer, which may not be in healthcare. It may be in software. It may be in manufacturing. That makes you look outside your industry and say, wait, this is someone that's not addressing the stuff that we're addressing, but they're doing it really well. How do we take that and borrow from that? So I think it's dangerous to only look at the pure competition.
I think that's worth the price of admission to today's webinar. I also laugh about it because if there's any MarketMuse people watching this webinar, they're probably laughing because I say the word aspirational model and aspirational peer quite often. I believe, like, my wife says it at home now, because I say aspirational model for the exact same reason. Is to say who's publishing at the cadence that you desire to, and they're publishing across the buy cycle or across the patient journey in the way that you wish you were, whether it's in your industry or not, whether they're a publisher, whether you're the e-commerce site and they're a publisher that's competing with you for the same terms, whether you're unbranded XYZ, ailments.com, and you also have a branded drug, no matter what, you've got to look and say, what is the ideal model that you would like to aspire to? There's always going to be someone to look to. It may take you a year and a half to get your machine running, But I love that idea. I think it's really poetic for this.
Yeah, and I think just if I can add one quick thing, there's also a danger in only looking at the behemoths if you're not a behemoth, right? Because like we could today, for instance, talk about hospital marketing, and we could talk about the Mayo Clinic all day. Well, guess what? If you are a smaller organization, you can steal some things from the Mayo Clinic, but you do not have the resources to do what they do. So that's why we always pick a mix of like competition your size, sometimes even smaller and nimble, but not just, you know, behemoths.
Right, and you know, trying to punch up with like lead gen super networks, you know, they may be a particular color. You know, don't punch with those folks because you're going to get punched in the face every time because they know they have these beautiful structures. And you've got to really stay ahead of the game. You've got to understand like why what they're doing is working. You should understand what that is, but understand you may not be able to get there immediately. And if you try to do some of these things, and I'm going to say some people get the benefit of the doubt with less quality content. If you've already got the authority, if you've already got the trust, sometimes you're actually writing worse content and getting away with it.
Yep.
And you see that with large publishers who have that established. So how can you tactically approach that when you've got, you know, you're writing to the patient journey? How do you like get ahead of, you know, maybe the mid-market or your peers at the same level? How do you get ahead of these, you know, these behemoths, at least getting, you know, surgically attacking them, you know, from as it were?
Yeah, well, and it's a multifaceted thing. I mean, I will say this one thing about, since you kind of mentioned the patient journey, one of the mistakes I see people make, and let's take like a large group practice or even a medium-sized group practice. If they are focused on content, they are only focused on the top of the funnel. What will bring my next patient in? They are not focused on cross-selling. Hey, reminder, we also can provide you with these services. They're not focused on retention, using marketing for retention, I should say. And there's a lot of things they can be doing kind of post-patient acquisition that they're not. And I get it. I get why people, they have to, you know, run their businesses and fuel their businesses, but that's a big miss when they're not focused on kind of post-patient content and marketing.
On the nose, every time working with a client, what you said is absolutely true. Totally thinking top of funnel. And this goes in other your money, your life industries. It doesn't work. This is your content tip for the webinar. If you only cover one stage of the journey, you don't have the authority or the trust that covers all that. You know everything about it. Why on earth would your page about what is lupus perform if you don't speak to everything you would want to know, all the way to post decision adherence, you know, living with lifestyles? If you don't have the content that tells the story, why on earth would your informational page do well? You know, that's the question you've got to ask is, am I actually speaking the language? What you just said is right on. That post-purchase plus, you're looking for referrals. You're looking for retention. You're looking for adherence, especially in pharma. Adherence is the hidden bad guy. It's, you know, people actually not taking the drugs that they buy from you and then blaming you for it after that. But yeah, I love the way that you had covered that. And when do you ever get in a state where you're writing content for the healthcare providers as the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a physician group, for instance. Yeah, we actually, I won't kind of name names. We're actually doing some work right now for somebody, and their entire focus is on physician recruiting. Okay. And so obviously that is a completely different type of content, where a patient audience, you know, you're producing things that may be more basic, you know, like an interactive sleep quiz or something like that. Good stuff, but fairly basic. For someone that's focused on the providers, needs to be a little bit headier. It needs to be written by a higher level thought leader, and you know, it's a different format, right? It's not a quiz, it's a white paper or something like that. So yeah, that's another thing, is when people start talking about healthcare and content marketing, a lot of people just gravitate towards, oh, this is about patients. Well, there's multiple audiences, frankly, dozens of audiences inside healthcare that in a lot of places just get ignored.
Totally. Hey, clinical trials is one. Candidates to become sourcing experts, medical device experts. I mean, there's an entire industry, obviously, people listening to this know, but where you're, trying to find doctors who will promote your device at conference and roadshows. How do you write content to envelop that? Right now, it's mostly done by word of mouth. The really elite content teams are writing content specifically for those audiences.
Exactly.
And then big pharma companies aren't able to move that quickly. So they're snaking their people with great content by writing content that tells the story that they're actually an expert. It's like an ABM, almost account-based marketing strategy, where if I'm writing content that's similar to what the content would be that they're reading in the journals that they read, and I'm doing that online, that's where the lifesaver teams are excelling. And I know a lot of your clients do that as a result. I read the content. I can usually tell when it's your stuff. But speaking of that, the question that's on, I think, a lot of folks' minds is, we know these common needs and appealing to the buy cycle, and we're going to talk about some of that. I've gotten a couple questions already, but I think that temporal content. I think temporal, as if everybody knows what that means a lot, but newsworthy content, responding to crisis. If you're in healthcare, responding to events. We're living in the Wuhan coronavirus COVID-19 world. What is that? How does that influence me? Obviously, don't talk about specific. How does that influence the clients that you work with, the most?
Well, to speak to that specifically, every single one of them has asked and/or is working on or has worked on, how do we communicate about this? And God, there's so many things to uncover here. One thing is, I say it's completely different for a large organization than a smaller one. The larger ones, generally speaking, have to fall in line with the CDC or the Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. They can't stray too far from those guidelines. The smaller ones, while they still have to do that, they have an opportunity to be a little bit more nimble, and I don't fully understand why they're not utilizing this. And I'll go back to, if you're a small group practice of doctors, 10 doctors, so you've got a patient panel, and you're afraid to put out anything about it because, oh, everyone's saying wash your hands and things like this, I can't say anything original. Well, how about send your patients a video, make it human. Like, you're small enough to be able to say, I'm speaking to my group of whatever the number is, 100, 500 patients. Do these little things. It might not be that you're saying anything truly different about coronavirus, but take that little extra step to humanize, your experience, that patient experience. So I rambled a bit. There's a very big difference between how large organizations handle this and the smaller ones.
Yeah, I think separating crisis communications plans, like one would put out from a PR perspective, versus content marketing. And it's not taking advantage of the situation, but if you've already got a strong inventory of content, and you're not just publishing after the fact to take advantage of the situation, you're actually putting something together that you can gain trust. You can be the source of truth. You can be the source of trust. Like, imagine, think of your favorite publisher that publishes healthcare content that, maybe it's on the edge of trust. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Do you believe that that's where you would go for this type of information? I think one opportunity you have in these situations is to build on existing inventory, get ahead of these things, start writing content that is going to fit potential future states, that also is going to generate eyeballs now. I think that those are all pieces of wisdom that you touched on. Do you deserve to be the page that somebody's reading about this?
Well, and what I'm hoping right? Because we're in the thick of it and no
Yeah.
one wants to think about business right now, and
Right.
that's fine. But after this passes, what I hope some of these organizations learn is that if you've just started trying to build that trust now via content, you're probably already too late. It doesn't mean you shouldn't say anything,
Right.
but for whatever the next crisis is, start now, okay? Because then you will have acquired the trust already, and people will be listening to you and waiting to hear what you have to say. If you're just starting now, it's a bit of an uphill battle.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, right on. It's if you've never covered public safety and you've never had a trustworthy pool of content and you put out a 4 or 5 page package and that's all you got out there, it's going to be you're going to look kind of like a flimsy piece of paper, right? It's not going to look like something that comes from a place of good unless you have so much. It's going to look like you kind of, were doing something almost to take advantage of the situation. So it's also in arrears. I think it's good to look and say, if someone goes and finds this information and that's all we have, was that actually good for our brand? Do we need to go back and write support content that levels up our inventory so that when they read that, they've got other things they can read? So I always like to say, you might have punched that one punch out, right? And you had to write that one page to get it out, and it was within the CDC guidelines or other guidelines. Maybe you need to go back and support it with a knowledge base. Maybe you need to go back and support it with some discussions about, the decisions one makes during a crisis about, treatment and other options and containment. And obviously those are things that are more relevant now, but it's not just about right now. I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, and to the point you just made, there's always ways you can take what are seen as common guidelines and apply them, for instance, to your audience. So you might be a system that only deals with seniors. Well, seniors have different concerns about coronavirus than a millennial does. So specifically, you gear your stuff only to seniors. Like these are, and it's kind of marketing 101, but it goes back to what is your target audience, okay? And you're writing for them, not for everybody. So there's a lot of things people can do, even if they feel unoriginal about what they're saying to solve this problem.
That's like Mike's tricks of the trade there. I love that. I mean, that a lot of people say that when they're looking at repurposing, and we'll get into some repurposing topics in a minute, is you can take, we can take the transcript of this show, this webinar, and turn it into 50 landing pages geared towards different audiences. You can do it. We can build one that's towards medical devices. We can build one that's towards, pharma. We can build some for, small practice, large practice. We can take it and spin it towards those groups. Same concept there. How can you take a piece of guidelines and tune it towards, people that are factory workers, people that are, have small children in school. It can be any target market. As long as it's my target market, it's going to make sense, right?
Yeah.
And how do you build that foundation? And we've got a really good question that's actually in line relevant to this is, how do you get started? When you're just starting up, if you're focused on healthcare in this specific, or you're just you're finding yourself assessing what you have. And I haven't done any, if you're sitting here listening to this, I haven't really done any of this. Is paid an option? That's actually a question from an audience. Is there a lot of paid channels? Should I be also focusing on and spending money on, campaigns, paid campaigns, channel campaigns, syndication campaigns, in addition to some of the things you see on the screen here, thinking about content quality, thinking about my users and audience, what would you say is needed to get started?
Okay, I'll start with yes to all those things.
I know, I'm saying yes too, but where do you get, literally, if you were spending, if you had 4 cycles, where would they be?
Well, so, I'm going to say something very basic to probably most people, but I have never seen a real sophisticated content marketing effort go well without a strategy and planning process to start it. Now, it looks different for every organization, but I have never seen, I suppose the alternative of like, we're just going to make up some things and start creating things. That's our content strategy. I've never seen that go well. Okay, so the first thing I'd say is you have to start with whatever your strategy and planning process is, whoever's involved. Okay, you have to start there. If for no other reason, it forces you to learn about your audience and create those guardrails for the stuff you are going to create. And then going into the other thing you mentioned, it also addresses the marketing side of content marketing, which, believe it or not, gets lost for a lot of organizations, healthcare or otherwise. They truly still think if we create it, they will come. And the distribution aspect, okay, is so important. And what we refer to as kind of surround the castle. Like, it's not good enough to create one thing and put it in one place in one channel. Oh, look, there it is.
I slid it in there. I needed to get your surrounding the castle slide in there. It looks good.
I like it. Because people read different things in different formats. Some people use search engines, some people like email, whatever it is. So you kind of have to cover all of these channels to do it effectively. To the specific question about paid, obviously some of this is budget dependent. What I always say is, especially if you're first starting out, you do need to make budget for paid, because it is cluttered out there. If you haven't built trust yet, if you don't really have a brand, you kind of have to use paid to start getting eyeballs on your stuff, and that's where the trust builds. I'm not saying larger organizations shouldn't use paid. I just actually think it's more important when you're smaller to begin amplifying your stuff. Otherwise, also there, you take the risk that you're going to start producing really great stuff, fantastic content, and you're going to consider it a failure because you couldn't get the eyeballs on it. Instead of saying, well, what if I use something like paid to get the eyeballs on it, and kind of there's an appreciation and trust built for everything I publish. So yeah, paid is a fairly necessary component.
I think this describes, everywhere you want to be, and it's how much can you expend is certainly the big question. Obviously, it's the big question that MarketMuse answers, is how much do I need to create, and that's built into our technology. Is to say you don't have any authority on this. You're going to have to build a foundation. You have a lot, so that you're going to be putting wins on the board every time you publish on these topics. Maybe not on those topics. But I always like to ask, even with paid, is to say, do I deserve to have this visitor yet? Right? When they come to my site, have I established the trust? Am I going to have consistent conversions? Have I done the work to get there? And I think that's the same with paid. I mean, not aggressively buying paid until you're comfortable with your conversion funnel, until you truly believe that it's repeatable. You're not just throwing bullets. You're not just throwing money at it and wasting bullets on there. I think is a key, especially if you're small and just starting out. So that's a great question. Thank you, Jacob. And in a SaaS scenario, which I know this person is, you really want to make sure it's repeatable. You want to if you're buying traffic, you want to make sure that those sequences, the audience, and you're going to get consistent results out of that paid campaign. So really break it down into its pieces, parts, understand each step the user's taking in that conversion experience, and maybe invest in some conversion rate optimization discussions with somebody who might take you through. Like, it gets back to what Mike said though, it's have that documented process. Buying a particular set of words in a particular set of channels isn't a process. It's what am I going to do when that traffic starts coming through? How am I going to adapt? That's the solution for paid or paid social. So I think that's really, really wise. How have you instructed customers or clients in healthcare specifically to get employee advocacy programs going? I see here you have leverage employees. How is that typically a focus? Is it so that they become content producers? Is it so that they're supporting social campaigns? What is it?
It's a little bit of all that. And when I put this on here, I will say it's not easy. Yeah. Okay. For some reason, people think it's easy to get all their employee base to share, to do all these things. It's not. And I've seen everything from monetary incentives to performance review incentives, like literally people looking at how many things did you share. So there is no silver bullet. One of the things, and I'm just going to give you one that sometimes works, is reminding people that this actually helps their personal brand as well, right?
Mhm.
So if you're an employee of MarketMuse, you're an employee of MarketMuse right now. You at some point might not be. I'm sure you want everyone to stay, but at some point you might not be. And what's one of the first things your next employer is going to look at? Your LinkedIn profile and see, like, does this person actually participate in the community in some form? And sharing content is just one example, but that is one that starts to resonate with people. And sometimes we have, LinkedIn experts come in and give the whole, like, this is why you need to do this. But if you can get people bought into, like, this affects your personal brand, not just our corporate brand, that is one thing. The other thing I'll say is it starts at the top. Okay, we have clients that ask, why won't our employees share? I go and look at their profiles, the CEO, COO, you're not sharing. Why would they do it, right? It's like being a parent in a sense, like your children are going to reflect your behavior, good or bad, oftentimes. So if those top execs aren't participating in the effort, why are you expecting everyone else to do it? They should be the most proud of what they're publishing, right?
Yes, on the nose. I'm rabid about the topics that you just discussed. I sometimes will say it's almost like forced social behavior, but there are great businesses that provide consulting, like Bangresso, on this type of thing. But if you're internally, it's definitely one where you've got to lead it. You've got to get everybody motivated to support these endeavors. Like like you said, show them why it impacts them. If somebody looks at something that we've done from a client, from a partner, from someone who is looking to become a client, and we can track that back, that really connects the dots. I think for the whole team is saying, you put that effort in, you literally pressed a button and somebody you care about saw it. Like that getting that connected, that can drive huge wins for content. I mean, sometimes you'll have a bar for content of 100 organic entrances in a month, right? Well, just through hustle you can get that. People aren't thinking critically about that in healthcare or in B2B tech or any other of these spaces. It's like you can actually generate that amount of hustle pretty quickly with some appropriate excitement. I love that idea. Speaking of performance, in healthcare, how is that for you? Like, how do you walk in the door? Do you do discovery of, do they understand their KPI? Do you have a set of performance metrics that you often will be talking about?
Sure. Is there a standard set that we talk about? Yes. And I don't mean to be too generic, but it always starts with goals. We have certain systems all about brand awareness. So I'm measuring something entirely different than someone that is get me new patients, right? And we've all heard that type of thing. And then everything in between in terms of cross-sell and things like that. So what I always say is there is no one size fits all measurement solution. Anybody that tells you that, I want to talk to them because I'd love to see it. I just haven't seen it for content because every organization is different. So, certainly we measure things like readership of particular pieces, whether it be, blog posts, articles, white papers, ebooks, interactive content pieces. That's the other thing. There's different ways of measuring each of those things. An ebook, you might measure based on lead generation or form submissions. A blog post, you're measuring based on, maybe page views, maybe time on page, things like that. An interactive piece of content, okay, you're measuring by how many steps did they get through in my quiz or what have you. So that's what makes it can't be one size fits all, is every piece has to be measured a little bit differently.
I think
Right.
when you said generic, though, I don't think that's generic. I think that's really specific. I think the contextual of there is you have to do it by content type. And, think critically about content types. Think critically about which content type's right for your audience. And I know that that's something that you do kind of as a science at BrightSource with repurposing. Can you kind of touch on that? Like, how do you get someone to agree with you that this interactive piece of content isn't generating leads, but it's valuable?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. Is
Yeah.
answer number one.
Right.
I always go back to the audience, right? When we choose content types, we first go to the audience and try to figure out, do we know, right? Like, again, senior population, are they going to take a little interactive quiz? I don't know, probably not. Will they even read a blog post? Maybe not. Like, so you have to figure out for each audience what actually appeals to them and what they will consume. And then you cannot, for most organizations, choose every type. So you might say, and this is very difficult, right? You might start with 10 types, and after your plan is done, especially if you're kind of just getting started, say, I'm focusing on 3. And maybe next year I'll open it up, but I believe based on data, whatever it is, these 3 are the ones that I can do at a super high quality, because what also happens if you create a larger portfolio, quality starts to go down, generally speaking. So you might create great blog posts, but your videos suck or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I always encourage people, try to start here and then you expand it. Not everyone likes to hear crawl, walk, run, but especially if you're getting started, that's what you got to do.
I don't like to hear that, especially if I want to run. I want to run day one with everybody, but it's okay. It's okay. I understand the realities, and what you described though, it is. I think I like to map what you stated to learning types. So learner types, being empathetic about your audience. Some people like to listen to things. Some people like to read. Some people like to, take on things as, different formats. I think you gotta guess your audience's learning types, or write to all of them. Make sure you've got content in all different styles, like all different functions. The worst thing you can do is put something in front of an audience of people with, let's say strong egos, that is very, bland and boring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you put somebody who is, maybe they are people that a group that's not going to read long form content. All you do is publish long form content because you think it's going to do well on SEO. It's not, you're not aligned with your audience, and it really just misses the boat. I love the way that you had positioned that. And gated content, how important is gated content for your audience, and what do you do to really get the most out of gated content?
So I still believe in gated content. I'll explain why, and it has to do with how you introed me. Because all of the stuff we do is super high quality, to me, if it's high quality, then it's not a big deal for someone to give you your information. If you're producing low quality, I understand. Why would I give you any information whatsoever? The other thing I'll say is, just because someone submits a form to download an ebook, when people tell me, I'm going to have my SDR follow up with them 7 times in the next 10 days, well, that's a mistake. That person that doesn't want to buy anything, they're looking for education. So you don't do gated and expect to do that, right? It's kind of building that trust relationship. If someone downloads something, send them something else to read that's related. And then what I always say about it is, all it's designed to do is inform a conversation if you ever have it. And that's it. Like, you are educate, educate, educate. Eventually, if you ever get to talk to that person, great. You'll have some sense of what they care about. But if you set your expectations there and not much further, you'll be good.
Yeah, if they feel good after having given you their information and they got something out of the document, that's wonderful. I mean, that's the basis of that's the concept of the funnel. That's the concept of nurturing. And that's what you're really doing. You're giving somebody so that when there is a crisis, we were just talking about a callback, they come to your site to read. And that's valuable. That has so much value. I think that that's really good. I put this slide in here from some right source materials because it shows you what you can get out of one content investment. Obviously, I'm a believer in gated content too, but I think it's important because you can write around the gated content. You can sometimes build 10, 20, 30 great pages that all point to the same asset. That's good. That's okay. Like people are like, I can have one landing page for one article, one landing page for one download. This content upgrade only goes on that page. Why? You know, you can write many of those, and many to one win, the many to one cluster like you've got here. Clustering is not just for topics. It can be for content types to appeal to different audiences, industry specific. You know, if you're in the point of sale space, you might have the most wonderful content for this type of business, that type of business. You know, convenience stores, breweries. You know, but everybody's downloading the same thing. You just built this great fly paper to approach somebody researching that material, taking that for your audience as a pro, a professional way of doing it. I think that's what, you know, you do very well, is to kind of walk somebody through that so that they can make that decision. Excellent, that's awesome. Cool, well, I got a bunch of questions. We don't have a ton of time, but I think we'll be able to get through a few of them. So on your money or your life, the questions were, what are your tips for people thinking about, you know, they're in that space, they're worried about things like the Medic update, you know, Google Medic update, which was, you know, the theoretical thing where anyone that had low quality content and was in your money or your life space, there's been about 6 iterations of it. What are the advice, what are the things that you might consider thinking about? It's easy to say, right, great stuff. Right, but what are the tuned in things that you know, what have you encountered? What are the kind of, what's the mantra at Right Source for that?
So your money and your life obviously goes together with EAT.
Right.
Okay? And EAT, for anyone that doesn't know it on the thing, expertise, authority, trustworthiness. Did I get that right?
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
So to me, EAT is part of how you dress your money in your life. And you know far better about the inner workings of Google and algorithms. But if you are creating things that come from an expert, okay, that have authority in some form, whether it's the expert, whether it's the domain it's on, there's a whole bunch of different authority factors. And then you built up that trustworthiness over time, and I have no idea how they necessarily measure that, then your money and your life becomes easier to address. At least that's the way I see it. And that's why when you say the mantra at Right Source, the best I know about the future is that quality always wins. And so if we do nothing else, that will never change with what we do for the folks we work with, because I feel like that addresses those two, YMYL and E.
Yeah, quality wins in the end if supported by at least sound foundations, and it is right. I mean, I always like to take a step into, you know, some of the tips that we work with teams to think about is really an examination of the language used on those pages. And I'm not just saying that because I work for an AI company that does natural language processing and all that stuff, but it's really examine, how would an expert actually cover this topic? Is that how you're covering it? With what tone are they covering the topic? This is your bonus value for everybody still here in the Q&A or listening to the recording. If you've got a lot of maybes, mights, coulds, and woulds, you're in trouble. All right, with this. All right, and that's so some things are as simple as that. If your content's written by staff or site admin, you're in trouble. And think about the sites. Think about the sites that don't have real humans. They're not board certified experts. They're not real people, or they're, you know, what's the word? Pseudonyms? Yeah, they're pseudonyms. Yeah, they're, you know, and I almost said some different word there for pseudonyms. But those people, how are they going to establish trust? Is that what your sites look like? Was there some sort of policy? So, you know, you've got, this is written by your brand mascot. This is written by Joey, the you know, the healthcare dog. because all of your articles are written by Joey the healthcare dog. I mean, I've seen it all. I mean, I've literally seen articles on a site written with a profile that is an actual frog. Okay, do you really think that that person has the trustworthiness of, when they're evaluating the quality of the content? So, I mean, all of these things should go into your evaluation of this content. Are you selling something? Are you selling something in the same language that you're also giving healthcare advice? Good luck when these things come through, when these waves of pain come through, right? Yeah.
That's why gasp for all the marketers out there.
Right.
Some healthcare articles should not include a CTA.
Right.
Imagine that.
Right.
Just let the content sit there and do its job, right? Because that affects exactly what you're saying. And if you don't think Google's smart enough to look at all the things you're talking about, what we found out is they are, and they're only going to get smarter. So,
and if you haven't read yet, if you haven't read the QRG, if you don't know what the QRG is, it's the Quality Raters Guidelines.
Yep.
That's your to-do. Put it under your pillow, read it tonight. You can look it up, say most recent QRG, read it. If you've never read that before, you have to at least skim it. It's like 240 pages. But it really gives you a lens on how human raters are looking at content and grading it. It's not how the algorithm works. Don't mislead this. It's not, but how they think about quality. And then you can think to yourself, wow, does my site not even meet these human rater guidelines? I'm in trouble. I mean, a lot of I would say I'm in trouble, but you could also say, oh no, I'm in great shape. I'm in great shape. But you can also find content on your site that's not that great and fix it, right? Make it better. You've got a lot of links to it. It's getting a lot of traffic, but nobody's converting, or it gets a lot of traffic and you're ashamed of it. I mean, that's really where I start with anyone. It's to say, do you have any content that gets a lot of traffic that you don't really like anymore? Why don't you like it? Like that happens a lot, and in healthcare especially. I mean, they know. One example I use, hopefully they're not listening, but no, maybe they are. Their site, 90% of their traffic was to a page that was an advisory-based page, and it was 6 years out of date. And they were so afraid to update it. They were worried about the traffic. How many people are in that boat? A lot of people are in that boat. I mean, one example that the site is about, God, I can't give explicit, but it's about a particular healthcare treatment. And they had written an article that gets a lot of traffic from people looking for recipes for the product that's part of that treatment. And those are the types of situations you run into all the time in healthcare. You've got visitors coming from different worlds, different audiences. So I think you gave a lot of examples of thinking about your audience, but also think about like what would a robot look at? What would humans look at? Would they really believe that you are the expert? So I think that's a great place to stop our discussion. You've got a probably gated, awesome content, the blueprint for their 10-step guide, the ebook. Right Source Marketing, MJ Sweeney, Twitter, Mike Sweeney, LinkedIn. Anything about Right Source Marketing that you'd like to kind of add before we close up?
No, I mean, the big thing I hope people come away from this with, forget about the kind of opportunistic content and things like that, that you have to start with a strategy and a plan, and that trust takes time to build. So if you're dealing with crisis right now, okay, now is when you start for the next time. It takes, content marketing is not a short-term play, okay? It's long-term, and you have to be consistent. So probably those two things.
Excellent. Yes. I mean, if you're not going to if you think something's going to happen in 2020 and you're just getting started now, you're going to have to really, really put points on the board and be aggressive for yourself. If you're going to go work with an agency, like Right Source, if you're going to, put together your MarTech stack, add MarketMuse, obviously, and other things, you've got to give it some time. You've got to publish appropriately. You've got to tune up and optimize and improve what you have. You've got to have a repurposing plan. You got to have a documented plan to be thinking about having results in 3, 6, 9, next year. Put yourself in a good position so that the next one of these challenges comes out, you're going to look really, really good. We have a trial. Please go sign up if you're not already a MarketMuse customer. If you are publishing, more than a handful of content items per month, you're going to be wanting to look for one of our larger offerings. So fill out a form. Make sure you tell us you're not just downloading a document, fill out a form, right, Mike? And you're looking to get a customized demo on the site. And you can always reach out to me directly on Twitter and LinkedIn or my email. But Mike, so many thanks. I think this has been one of the most valuable, easy to apply webinars we've done on content strategy. Any last words?
No, I just, again, for those of you that think planning is hard, go check out the ebook, because I think we simplify it for you. It doesn't mean you can do it in a day, but it takes you step by step through all the things you need to think about. So I would start there. I
paste Right Source content marketing of their own stuff into our learning channel in Slack all the time. He's telling the truth. He's preaching gospel. It's good stuff. Go read their blog. They do an amazing job. Go download this document. If you're thinking about building high quality graphics, infographics, repurposing something you've spent a ton of money on and it has underperformed, that guy right there. Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeff.